The text came through at 6:47 in the morning while I was still standing at the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee going cold in my hand. Just took off, love you. See you Thursday. I remember smiling at it, the way you smile at something small and ordinary, the kind of message that means a marriage is still functioning the way it should. 40 minutes later, I was driving Priya to her physical therapy appointment on the other side of Grand Rapids when I turned onto Fulton and saw a silver Audi Q7 parked crooked in front of a small brick colonial with black shutters. And my hands went cold on the wheel because I knew that license plate the way I knew my own name. TRK 40471, the car I had ridden in 1,000 times. The car that was supposed to be sitting in long-term parking at Gerald R. Ford International Airport, while my husband sat 30,000 feet above Lake Michigan on his way to a conference in Chicago. I did not scream. I did not honk. I sat there at the stop sign behind an idling school bus and felt something in my chest go very quiet, the way a house goes quiet right before a storm knocks the power out. Priya asked me what was wrong, and I did not answer her because I was already turning the car around, already parking 2 houses down under a maple tree that hadn't dropped its leaves yet, already walking up a stranger's front path in my work flats with my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought the neighbors could hear it. I climbed 3 porch steps that creaked under my weight, and through the gap in the curtains of that front window, I saw my husband of 11 years sitting on someone else's couch in his travel clothes, his boarding pass still folded out of his shirt pocket, laughing at something my own sister had just said to him. That was the moment my whole life folded in half. My name is Odessa Lang. Before I go further, I need you to understand who I was before that Tuesday in October, because the woman standing on that porch was not the same woman who would eventually walk away from it. I was 39 years old. I had spent the last 12 years building a boutique architectural firm from a spare bedroom into a company with 14 employees, and a portfolio that included 2 buildings on the Grand Rapids Historic Register. And I had been married to Trent Kowalski since I was 28, back when he was still finishing his MBA, and I was still convinced that loyalty was something you earned by giving it first. My younger sister, Priya Voss, was 34, recovering from a knee surgery that had kept her out of work for 6 weeks, and I had been the one driving her to every single appointment because that is what older sisters do. We show up, we carry the casseroles and the car keys and the emotional weight nobody else wants to touch. I want to be honest about something. Standing on that porch, I did not immediately think affair. My mind, in its desperate and very human need to protect itself, tried on a dozen other explanations first. Maybe his flight was delayed, and he'd come to check on Priya since she lived closer to the airport than we did. Maybe there was a family emergency he hadn't told me about yet. Maybe I was wrong about the car. Maybe Grand Rapids was full of silver Audis with similar plates. Maybe. I stood there building an entire architecture of denial in under 10 seconds, the same skill I used to design buildings, except this time I was designing an escape hatch out of a truth I already knew. Then Trent leaned across the couch cushion and tucked a strand of hair behind my sister's ear, the exact gesture he used to do to me during our first year of dating, back when we still stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about nothing, and Priya closed her eyes and leaned into his hand like it belonged there. Like it had belonged there for a while. I did not knock. I did not want to give either of them the courtesy of composing their faces. I stepped back off the porch, walked down those 3 creaking stairs, and got back into my car with a kind of calm that frightened me more than screaming would have, because I understood, even then, that whatever came out of me next was not going to be rage. It was going to be something colder and far more permanent. I drove 3 blocks and parked behind a Walgreens, put the car in park, and sat there for 11 minutes without moving. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on my dashboard the entire time, the way you watch a wound to see if it's actually bleeding as badly as it feels. My phone buzzed once. A text from Trent. Landed early, layover in Detroit, missed connection, will keep you posted. I read it twice. He had built an entire alternate timeline for a flight that had never taken off, texting me lies from my sister's living room while his boarding pass sat folded in his shirt pocket like a prop. I did not answer him. Instead, I opened my banking app, the joint account. Trent and I had shared since our second year of marriage, and I stared at the balance for a long time. Then I did something that surprised even me. I did not transfer money. I did not close accounts. Not yet. I am not a woman who acts in the first 11 minutes of finding out her marriage is a lie, because 11 minutes is not enough information, and I have spent my entire career learning that a structure built on incomplete information collapses. What I did instead was call the one person who has never once in my life given me bad advice. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I need you to come get Priya's dog from her house sometime in the next hour, and I need you to not ask me why yet." My mother, Corrine Voss, has a gift for hearing the exact temperature of a crisis in 4 words or less. She didn't ask a single follow-up question. She just said, "I'm putting my shoes on," and hung up. I drove home. Not to Priya's, not back to that brick colonial with the black shutters, but to the house Trent and I had bought 9 years earlier on a quiet street in East Grand Rapids, the house with the wraparound porch he'd insisted on even though it cost us $20,000 more than we'd budgeted. The house where I had hung his grandmother's quilts and planted the hydrangeas his mother had given us as a housewarming gift. I sat in the driveway and looked at that house for a long time, and I thought about every dinner I had made in that kitchen while believing I was building something with a partner, when in reality I had been building it alone the entire time and simply hadn't been told yet. Then I went inside, and I did the only thing that made sense to a woman whose entire professional life had been built on structural integrity. I started documenting. I want to explain something about myself that matters here. I am an architect. My entire career depends on my ability to notice small structural inconsistencies before they become catastrophic failures, a hairline crack in a foundation, a beam that's been quietly overloaded for years before it finally gives. I have trained myself, professionally, and now it turned out personally, to notice the difference between something that looks fine and something that is fine. And once I started looking at my marriage with that same eye, I could not stop seeing the cracks I had spent years walking past. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up 18 months of credit card statements. I want you to understand, I had never done this before. Trent and I had separate cards for personal spending and a joint card for household expenses, and I had simply trusted the arrangement the way you trust a load-bearing wall you've never had inspected. What I found in the first 20 minutes made my hands shake so badly I had to set the laptop down twice. There were 14 separate charges over the past year and a half to a flower shop 3 miles from Priya's house, none of them on holidays that meant anything to our marriage. There were 7 charges to a jewelry repair shop, small amounts, the kind you'd use to have a ring resized or a clasp fixed, and I did not own a single piece of jewelry that had ever needed repair. There was a recurring monthly charge, $210, to something called Riverside Storage Solutions, a storage unit facility on the south side of the city, a charge that had been running for 14 months and that I had apparently signed off on every single month without ever once questioning what it was for, because that is what trust does, it makes you stop reading the fine print of your own life. I called Martin Osai, our family's attorney, the same man who had handled the paperwork when I bought out my business partner 4 years earlier. Martin has known me since I was 22 years old, fresh out of graduate school, terrified and ambitious in equal measure, and he has never once in 17 years told me what I wanted to hear instead of what was true. "Odessa," he said, and I could hear him setting something down on his desk, the particular sound of a man giving you his full attention. "What happened?" I told him, all of it. The text message, the car, the window, the couch. I told him in the flat, factual tone I use when I'm walking a client through a structural report, because if I let even 1 ounce of emotion into my voice, I was afraid the whole thing would collapse right there on the phone. There was a long silence. Then Martin said, "How long have you two had the storage unit?" 14 months, I said. "I only just found it on the statement." "Do you have a key?" "No," I said. "I've never even heard the name of that place until 20 minutes ago." "Odessa," Martin said, "I want you to listen to me carefully. Whatever you're feeling right now, and I know it's enormous, I need you to let me handle the financial side before you make a single move. Do not confront him tonight. Do not confront your sister tonight. I'm going to need time to trace that storage unit, and I want a forensic look at your joint accounts going back 3 years, not 18 months. Something tells me 18 months is not where this starts. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up. Something tells me 18 months is not where this starts. I thought about our anniversary trip to Charlevoix 2 summers earlier, when Trent had suddenly needed to take 3 work calls from the hotel balcony at odd hours. I thought about the golf trips to Traverse City that had started happening every 6 weeks instead of the twice a year they used to be. I thought about the way Priya had started showing up to family dinners in clothes that looked more expensive than her substitute teaching salary should have allowed, and how I had complimented her on a new coat without once asking where the money for it had come from, because you don't interrogate your sister's wardrobe, you just admire it and pass the potatoes. My mother called around 7 that evening. She had picked up Priya's dog, a scruffy terrier named Biscuit, using the spare key Priya had given her months ago for exactly this kind of emergency, and she had let herself into an empty house because Priya, apparently, was still not home from her physical therapy appointment that had ended at 10 that morning. "Odessa," my mother said, her voice careful in the way it only gets when she already suspects the answer to a question she's about to ask. "Where is your sister?" I told her. I told her everything, sitting alone at my kitchen table with the lights off because I hadn't been able to bring myself to turn them on, watching the last orange light drain out of the sky over my hydrangeas. My mother did not cry. My mother has never once cried in front of me in my entire life, not at her own mother's funeral, not during her divorce from my father 22 years earlier, and she did not cry now. She went very quiet, the same quiet I had felt in my own chest on that porch, and then she said 4 words that I will remember for the rest of my life. Whose side was Priya taking? It was such a strange question in the moment, and it took me a beat to understand what she meant. She wasn't asking whose side Priya was on in some abstract sense. She was asking whether my sister had chosen to betray me knowingly, deliberately, over time, or whether this was some kind of terrible, isolated mistake she had stumbled into and couldn't find her way out of. I didn't have an answer. I still don't know which one is worse. Trent texted again at 8:52 that night. Made it to the hotel finally, exhausted. This trip already feels like a disaster. Call you before bed. I stared at that message for a full minute before I typed back 3 words. Have a good trip. I have thought about why I sent that. Why, standing in the wreckage of what I already knew, I chose to let him keep lying for one more night. Martin's advice played a part, certainly, the professional need to gather evidence before triggering a confrontation that might send everyone scrambling to cover their tracks. But there was something else too, something I'm not proud of and also not ashamed of, which is that I needed one more night to be the version of myself who still had a marriage. Because I understood, with the clarity of an engineer watching a crane tip past the point of return, that after tomorrow I never would again. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the guest room, the one we'd always joked would become a nursery someday, before we quietly stopped joking about it 3 years ago, when the conversations about children turned into conversations about timing that never resolved into anything, and I went through every photograph on my phone from the last 2 years, looking for the moment the cracks had started. I found it, or at least I found where I first stopped being able to unsee it. A photo from Priya's 33rd birthday dinner, 18 months earlier, the same 18 months as that storage unit charge. Trent was sitting beside her instead of beside me, which I had chalked up at the time to musical chairs and nothing more, and in the photo, his hand was resting on the back of her chair in a way that, looking at it now with new eyes, was not the hand of a brother-in-law being polite. It was the hand of a man marking territory. The next morning, I drove to Riverside Storage Solutions before the sun was fully up. I did not have a key, but I did have something better, which was a facility manager named Deshan who, after I explained I was the co-signer on the account and needed to confirm the unit hadn't been broken into, walked me back to Unit 214 and used the master override after I provided my ID and the account number Martin had already tracked down through the credit card statement. Deshan didn't ask many questions. People rarely do when a woman shows up alone at 7 in the morning with Ray D.I.'s and a folder of documents, because on some level, everyone in this world has seen this story before. Inside that 10 by 10 unit was a life I never knew my husband was living. A queen-sized air mattress, still inflated, with sheets that were clearly not from our house. A small dresser with men's and women's clothing folded inside, some of it still with tags on. A shoebox full of receipts, hotel stays in Petoskey and South Haven that I had never once been invited to, dated across a span of almost 2 years. And at the bottom of that shoebox, folded into a velvet pouch, an engagement ring, not the one I wore, a different one entirely, with a note tucked beside it in my sister's handwriting that I recognized instantly because I had grown up watching that handwriting fill out birthday cards addressed to me. The note said simply, "Someday, when it's finally just us." I sat down on the floor of that storage unit and I did not cry either. I photographed everything. Every receipt, every hotel confirmation, the ring, the note, the dresser, all of it, because somewhere in the last 12 hours the architect in me had fully taken over from the wife, and the architect knew that evidence, properly documented, is the only foundation strong enough to hold up what comes next. I called Martin from the parking lot. "I found the storage unit," I said. "It's worse than I thought." "Tell me." I told him about the ring, about the note, about the 2 years of hotel stays. There was a long pause on his end before he said, "Odessa, this changes the financial strategy significantly. If your husband has been using joint marital funds, including the equity line on your house, which I have reason to believe he tapped into 11 months ago for reasons he never disclosed to you, to fund an entire second relationship with your sister, that is not simply infidelity. Depending on how the funds were characterized, that could constitute financial fraud within the marriage, and it absolutely affects how we approach the divorce settlement." "The equity line," I repeated. "How much?" $62,000, Martin said quietly, "drawn down in 3 separate withdrawals starting last November." I want to tell you I felt rage in that moment, the kind of rage you see in movies, the kind that throws things and screams into pillows. I didn't. What I felt was the strange, hollow calm of watching a building you designed yourself begin to fail from the inside, knowing exactly which beam gave out first and understanding, with terrible clarity, that you could have caught it years earlier if you had only known to look. Trent's flight, the real one this time, landed back in Grand Rapids at 4:30 that afternoon, 3 days earlier than the Thursday he had told me to expect him. I know this because Martin had already advised me to have our accounts and a temporary restraining order on joint asset withdrawals filed by 2 o'clock, and Trent, discovering the credit line frozen when he tried to pay for something at the airport, apparently panicked enough to cut his trip short and fly home immediately. I didn't ask where he had actually flown to. Chicago, probably, for whatever conference had been the cover story, since even liars sometimes attend the meetings they claim to be attending. It no longer mattered to me where his body had physically been. What mattered was where his life had been living for the last 2 years, and I already had the photographs to prove it. He came to the house at 6:15 that evening. I watched him pull into the driveway from the front window, and I noticed, in a way I never had before, how carefully he had always parked that Audi, centered perfectly between the lines of our garage, a man who cared deeply about the appearance of order even when the substance of his life had none. He came in through the front door using his own key, calling my name the way he always did, "Odessa, I'm home," and I let him get all the way to the kitchen archway before I spoke. "Sit down, Trent." He stopped in the doorway. Whatever he saw on my face made the color drain out of his own. "Odessa, what's going on? Why is the credit line frozen? I got an alert at the airport and I nearly had a heart attack. I thought someone stole our identity." "No one stole anything," I said. "I found it all myself." I watched something collapse behind his eyes, the particular collapse of a man realizing the story he has been telling himself, the one where he gets to keep both lives indefinitely, has just ended without his permission. "Odessa," he started, and I held up a single hand. "Before you say anything," I said, "I need you to know that I have photographs of the ring. I have photographs of the note. I have every hotel receipt going back to South Haven 17 months ago. I have the equity line withdrawals. I sat on the floor of that storage unit this morning for 40 minutes, Trent, 40 minutes, going through the entire Second Life you bill. Tea with my sister. And I need you to understand that there is nothing you can say to me right now that I have not already seen documented in your own handwriting or hers." He sat down, Not because I told him to, but because his legs, I think, simply stopped working. How long, I asked, has this actually been going on? Not the 18 months of the storage unit, all of it from the beginning. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the kitchen table we had bought together at an estate sale in our second year of marriage, a table I had refinished myself over one entire summer because Trent had said he loved that I could build things with my hands. Finally, he said, 2 years in March. 2 years? Priya's knee surgery had happened 6 weeks earlier. Every single ride I had given my sister to physical therapy, every casserole I had dropped off at her house during her recovery, every night I had stayed up late texting her encouragement about her exercises, I had been unknowingly serving as chauffeur and caretaker to the woman sleeping with my husband, and worse, I had been proud of myself for it. I had told my friends how close Priya and I had grown during her recovery. I had genuinely believed, right up until yesterday morning, that this was one of the better chapters of my adult relationship with my sister. "Does Mom know?" I asked. "I don't know what you've told her." "I told her everything I knew as of last night," I said, which at the time did not include the ring. Trent's face did something complicated then, something between guilt and unbelievably hope. "It's not what you think," he said. "The ring isn't, we hadn't decided anything. It was more of an idea, something we talked about someday, if things ever, if you and I ever." "If you and I ever what, Trent?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I understood, sitting there in my own kitchen looking at a man I had loved for 11 years, that he had been quietly waiting for our marriage to end on its own, waiting for me to grow tired or distracted or unhappy enough to leave first, so that he would never have to be the one who chose to destroy it. He wanted the ending without the responsibility of causing it. He wanted, in the most cowardly way a person can want something, to have both his wife's stability and his mistress's newness for as long as possible, and only choose between them once one of the two options ran out on its own. "I need you to leave tonight," I said. "I'll have Martin send over the temporary arrangements by tomorrow morning." "Odessa, please, can we talk about this like adults? Can we go to counseling? I know what I did I know it was unforgivable, but 11 years, Odessa, that has to count for something." "It counted," I said, "right up until you decided it didn't. You don't get to invoke 11 years now, after spending the last 2 of them building an entirely separate life with my sister on money you pulled out of the equity in our house without ever telling me. 11 years mattered to me the entire time, Trent. That's the difference between us. It only mattered to you when it became useful leverage in a conversation you're losing." He left around 8 that night, taking a single overnight bag, moving through our house like a stranger who had suddenly forgotten where anything was kept, opening the wrong drawers, standing confused in front of the hall closet. I did not help him. I sat at the kitchen table and watched him fumble through the last 20 minutes of his life inside a house he no longer had any real claim to, and when his car finally pulled out of the driveway, I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a building inspector standing in front of a structure that had just been condemned, relieved that the danger had finally been identified, but grieving, in a strange professional way, for what it might have been if it had only been built correctly from the start. Priya called me 9 times that night. I did not answer any of them. On the 10th call, I finally picked up, not because I had anything to say to her, but because I needed her to hear my voice say it directly instead of imagining what I might be thinking. "Odessa," she said, her voice already breaking, "please let me explain." "There is no explanation," I said. "That changes what you did so you can save your breath, but I'll listen if it makes you feel better to say it out loud." She cried for almost a full minute before she managed actual words. It wasn't supposed to happen. It started so small, it was just, he was there during my recovery, he'd stopped by to check on me since he was in the area. And it grew into something before I even understood what was happening. And by the time I realized how serious it was, I was already too far in to stop it. And I told myself it would end eventually. I told myself you'd never find out. I know how insane that sounds now, I know. "You let me drive you to Fi's." "Eichel therapy," I said. 11 times, Priya. 11 times I sat in that waiting room reading old magazines while you did your exercises, and the entire time, you were sleeping with my husband and letting me believe we were becoming closer as sisters. Do you understand what that actually did to me? It wasn't just the affair. It's that you used my love for you as camouflage for it. I know, she whispered. I hate myself for it. I've hated myself for 2 years. Not enough to stop, I said, and I hung up. My mother came over the next morning with 2 coffees and a look on her face I had never seen before, something between fury and heartbreak that seemed to be fighting for control of her expression in real time. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I had confronted Trent, and she said something that I have carried with me ever since. I raised 2 daughters, she said, to believe that family was the one thing you could always trust completely. I don't know how to reconcile the fact that the family member who broke that trust the deepest was another daughter. Are you going to talk to her? I asked. My mother was quiet for a long time. I already did, she said. Last night, after you told me about the ring, I drove to her house and I asked her the same question I asked you on the phone. Whose side was she taking? And do you know what she said to me, Odessa? She said she loved him, as if that answered the question I actually asked. Over the following weeks, the full shape of what Trent and Priya had built together came into focus the way a blueprint reveals itself line by line. Martin's forensic review of our joint accounts found that Trent had been quietly funneling money into a separate account for over a year, using consulting fees and bonus payments that should have gone into our shared savings. Money that had funded not just the storage unit and the hotel stays, but also 2 months of Priya's rent during a stretch where she'd told our entire family she was managing fine on substitute teaching income alone. The equity line withdrawal, $62,000, had gone toward a down payment on a small condo in Holland, Michigan, purchased under an LLC that listed Trent as the sole member. A property Priya had apparently visited with him at least 6 times under the cover story of a girl's trip to the lakeshore with a college friend who, when Martin's investigator eventually reached her, had no idea her name had ever been used that way. I filed for divorce 11 days after that Tuesday morning on Fulton Street. Because Michigan is a no-fault state, and because the evidence of the equity line withdrawal and the undisclosed LLC property was so thoroughly documented, Martin was confident we could pursue not just an equitable division of marital assets, but a claim for dissipation, meaning the court could award me a larger share of what remained specifically, because Trent had knowingly spent shared marital funds on an affair without my knowledge. I did not do this out of vengeance. I want to be clear about that, because I know some of you listening will assume I was simply trying to punish him financially for punishing me emotionally. That is not it. I did it because I had spent 11 years contributing every bit as much to our shared life as Trent had, financially and otherwise, and I was not going to walk away from that marriage having subsidized, unknowingly, the very betrayal that ended it. The divorce took just over 5 months to finalize, which Martin told me was remarkably fast for a case with this many financial complications, largely because Trent, once the evidence was laid out plainly in front of his own attorney, chose not to fight most of it. I think some small remaining part of him understood that contesting it publicly, forcing depositions, forcing Priya to testify under oath about a 2-year affair funded partly through mortgage fraud, would only make the damage to what was left of his reputation and hers even worse. He kept his job at the engineering firm downtown, though I heard through mutual acquaintances, the way you always hear these things in a city the size of Grand Rapids, that 2 of his colleagues who had once considered him a close friend stopped inviting him to their Friday golf outings once the details became common knowledge among people who mattered to him professionally. The condo in Holland was sold as part of the settlement, and I received 60% of the proceeds along with the full value of the equity line as a dissipation award, on top of an equitable split of our other joint assets. I did not gloat about this. I did not celebrate it the way you might celebrate a court victory in a television drama. I simply felt, when Martin called to tell me the final numbers had been approved by the judge, the quiet satisfaction of watching a structural report finally match the reality of the building. No more distortion, no more numbers that had been fudged to make something unstable look sound. Priya and I did not speak for almost 7 months. My mother, to her enormous credit, refused to act as a go-between for either of us, telling Priya plainly that she would not carry messages on her behalf, that if Priya wanted to repair anything with me, she would have to find the courage to do it herself, instead of routing it through the same family channels she had already damaged. My father, who lives in Arizona now and has always kept a certain emotional distance from the day-to-day of our family, called me exactly once during that entire period, and what he said to me stuck with me more than almost anything else anyone offered. "Your sister made a choice that cost her more than she understood it would," he said, "but you get to choose whether that choice gets to keep costing you anything beyond what it already has. Don't let her mistake become the thing that defines the rest of your life too." I thought about that conversation a great deal during the loneliest stretch of that year. The nights after the divorce was finalized, when I would come home to a house that suddenly felt enormous and quiet, when I would catch myself instinctively setting 2 plates at dinner before remembering. I threw myself into work instead, and in a strange twist that I could not have predicted, the firm actually grew during that period. I took on a project, renovating an old furniture factory into mixed-use loft apartments. The kind of complicated adaptive reuse project I had always wanted to attempt, but had never had the emotional bandwidth to pursue while managing the quiet, invisible labor of propping up a marriage that had already been failing for years without my knowledge. Priya finally reached out in May, almost exactly 8 months after that Tuesday morning. She did not call. She sent a letter, handwritten, delivered to my office instead of my house, which I understood later was intentional. She did not want to risk me refusing to open something that arrived at the home she had once helped destroy the piece of. The letter was 3 pages long. I will not share every detail of it here because some things belong only to the two of us, but I will tell you the part that mattered most. She wrote that she had spent those 8 months in therapy, real therapy, twice a week, trying to understand not just why she had done what she did, but why she had been able to sustain the lie for 2 years without the guilt eventually forcing her to stop on her own. She wrote that the hardest realization had not been losing me as a sister, though she said that loss had been the deepest one, but realizing that she had never actually loved Trent the way she told herself she did, that what she had actually been chasing was the feeling of being chosen over someone else, a feeling she traced back to a childhood spent constantly compared to me, the older sister who got the grades, who got into the good graduate program, who built the successful firm, who married first. She wrote that she was not asking for forgiveness because she did not believe she had earned the right to ask for it yet, but that she wanted me to know she understood, finally and completely, what she had actually taken from me, which was not simply a husband but 2 years of trust in my own perception of reality, the ability to believe that the people closest to me were exactly who they appeared to be. I did not respond to that letter for 6 weeks. When I finally did, I did not offer forgiveness either, because I did not have it to offer yet, and I have learned that false forgiveness performed before it is actually felt, does more damage in the long run than simply telling the truth about where you stand. I wrote back that I appreciated the honesty, that I believed the introspection was genuine, and that I was willing to attempt a slow, supervised rebuilding of some kind of relationship, starting with family gatherings where our mother was present, nothing more than that for now. She wrote back one line, "That is more than I hoped for, and exactly what I deserve to start with." We are, as of this recording, in a strange and careful place. We have had dinner together twice, both times with our mother present, both times short and a little stilted, but not hostile. I do not know if we will ever return to what we were before, the sisters who spoke every day, who told each other everything. And if I am honest, some part of me does not want to return to exactly that, because that closeness, it turns out, had been built on an assumption of transparency that was never actually true even before the affair began. What we are building now slowly is something more careful, something that does not assume trust but instead earns it back in small, verifiable pieces, which is, I suppose, not so different from how you rebuild a structure after discovering a hidden flaw in its foundation. You do not simply paint over the crack and pretend the building is sound. You reinforce it piece by piece, and you accept that it will never again be the structure it was before the damage was found, even if it can eventually become something sturdy in its own right. As for Trent, I heard he moved to Chicago for real about 4 months ago, taking a position with a firm there, the same city he had once used as a cover story for an affair with my sister. I found a strange, dark humor in that when I first heard it. My mother told me, and I could tell she was watching my face carefully to see how the news would land. It landed lighter than I expected. I did not feel grief. I did not feel anger. I felt the particular relief of someone finally closing a file that had been sitting open on her desk far too long. People sometimes ask me, when they hear this story, why I did not simply confront both of them the moment I saw Trent's car parked in front of my sister's house. Why I waited, why I documented, why I let myself sit through one more dishonest text message before letting either of them know what I had discovered. I understand the impulse behind the question, because in the moment, restraint feels like weakness, like something is being stolen from you twice, once by the betrayal itself and again by your own inability to react to it immediately. But I have learned something in the months since that Tuesday morning that I want to leave you with, because I think it matters far beyond my own particular story. The truth does not become less true if you wait a day to act on it. But the evidence of that truth, the proof that protects you when the people who hurt you inevitably try to rewrite what happened, that evidence disappears the moment you tip your hand. If I had knocked on that door the instant I saw them on the couch, Trent would have had 8 months to quietly move money, to close the storage unit, to construct a version of events soft enough for a judge or a family gathering to half believe. Instead, because I gave myself one single night to gather what I needed before the walls came down, I walked into every subsequent conversation, with my sister, with my husband, with the divorce attorneys, with my own mother, holding a complete and undeniable record of exactly what had happened and for exactly how long. That is not coldness. That is what surviving a betrayal with your dignity and your future intact actually requires sometimes, even when every instinct in your body is screaming at you to burn the whole thing down in the first 5 minutes. I do not know yet what my relationship with Priya will eventually become. I do not know if I will ever fully trust her again, or if some smaller, more permanent distance is simply the honest shape of what remains between us now. But I know what I did not lose, which was myself, my company, my sense of what I am capable of surviving with my composure intact. I know that the house on Fulton Street with the black shutters is for sale now, that Priya moved out of it in the spring, and that some mornings I still drive past that street on my way to a job site across town, and I feel nothing sharper than the dull recognition you feel passing any site of an old injury, a place that hurt once and has since begun, slowly and unevenly, to heal. If you had been standing on that porch instead of me, looking through that gap in the curtains at the two people you trusted most in the world sitting together on a couch that did not belong to either of them, I wonder what you would have done differently. Would you have knocked immediately, letting the fury out in the moment it demanded to be released? Would you have walked away and never looked back, refusing even the slow, careful rebuilding I chose to attempt with my sister? Or would you have done exactly what I did, swallowed the scream for one more night, gathered everything you needed in silence, and let the truth arrive on your own terms instead of theirs? I would love to hear what you would have done in the comments below. And if stories like this one, about betrayal, about the strange, complicated work of rebuilding a family after it breaks, about the kind of quiet strength it takes to survive discovering that the people closest to you were never entirely who they claimed to be, mean something to you, please consider subscribing and joining us for the next story.